Uh, Hello there. My name is Christopher McNamara, and I'm here today, pleased to be speaking with filmmaker Fernando Saldivia, who has made the film Brief Space of a Time. Fernando, perhaps first, maybe if you could just introduce yourself to the audience, the virtual audience or the audience that's on the other side of the screen, so they get to
Uh,
know who you are. And I've got lots of thoughts and questions about the film, but I thought maybe we should start with that.
uh, my name is Fernando Saldivia Yáñez. I am a Chilean documentary filmmaker currently based in Chicago.
Great. Terrific. Great. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for the film. It was a really
Thank you.
sublimely beautiful experience to watch the film, and I've got a number
Thank
of
you.
thoughts and questions about it. And I thought I'd start with this one. So one of the impressions that I got from watching this portrait film was that I felt as though I'd been invited into a very intimate space. Like there was an extra table that was set at the dinner table for us as viewers, and I think that's a very conscious strategy on your part. I'd love you to talk a little bit about the process by which you decided to kind of construct and make this film. Some really sort of conscious decisions that you made.
Um, Thank you for your comments, and to me, it's like a big honor to be at Ann Arbor. So really happy to share my film with you all. Um, the idea of intimacy and the way it developed through time was very important for me because my main interest was in portraying, capturing daily life, and you know, beyond that, my family's daily life. Um, all of this as a way to respond to the way in which the Mapuche people are usually portrayed in media in Chile, uh, which is either focused on violence due to some land reclamation conflicts, or in a way that's more, I don't know, based on the exotic, perhaps a sense of exoticism and some essentialism that I I didn't feel comfortable with just by hearing my uncle's experiences,
Right.
and the way he would talk about his life, and the things he wanted to say and share. And
Right.
so to me, uh, with this interest in portraying daily life, I thought, uh, and being with them, sharing with them, I felt like this sense of intimacy, was the perspective that was missing from the narrative, at least from the mainstream narrative. And
Yeah.
so my focus, my idea was, to be truthful in a sense to this sense of understanding space and time, and just life. It's a rural setting, and that's a big part of that too.
Yeah. Which is why I think the title is so fitting. I mean, it seems like, this idea of space, could really sort of be sort of thought of both in terms of the actuality of the space, but also these sort of ideas of like these sort of intervals of
Mhm.
like time that allows us sort of sort of a space for contemplation, a space that is, sort of not about the physicality of the place, although that's important, but it's also, the sense that it's about this other kind of psychic and emotional space
Mhm.
that seems to sort of be resonating in the film as we watch it unfold. So I think the title is really fitting, on a number of levels. And I just, like I'm thinking
Uh-huh.
about like that, the image early on in the film where we see the table with a tablecloth, and it's kind of fascinating. It just kind of leads me to this other question. I just want to. My observation is that as we're watching it and we see, the table slowly getting kind of prepared, and there's all these things that are happening off camera, and then when your uncle finally kind of arrives and sits down, it's like the scale of everything changes, and like everything, like it's just like the table suddenly becomes very small, and these figures loom so large that his head sort of goes out the edge of the frame, and it's like this sort of wonderful way in which you kind of like play around with perspective. So in addition to like space, there's also this idea about how sort of the relationships between people and the animals and other things are all sort of like sort of given this sort of level of attention that really sort of provides for these sort of quiet little moments and little sort of reveals. So
Mhm.
I love that aspect of it. And I really wanted to kind of like sort of, kind of like sort of say bravo on that. I think it's really quite lovely.
Cute.
Um, which leads me to this other question, and that is about
Mhm.
the strategy of using, for the most part, very long takes.
Mhm.
And it seemed as if there was kind of almost like you're articulating this kind of silent manifesto for you to sort of do it in this way. Like it's a very conscious decision. You begin with really specific shots, and then you sort of you structure them in very sort of long kind of like sort of like these long sort of strands of visual information, one thing after another, and a very sort of kind of there's a kind of a methodology to that that's sort of so conscious. How did you decide on how to frame these images up, and how do you feel about the sometimes random ways in which your subjects are present and then absent from the frame? It's like like I'm thinking about, for example, the phone call, where they're talking
Mhm.
about traditional medicine versus, the sort of medicine from the city. And so much of the time your aunt isn't even on screen. She's off, and we're just watching a pot simmering. And I'm just wondering, like, how you sort of how you feel about those things, and the sort of random sort of presence absence as kind of a strategy.
Mhm. Yeah. So I mean, first the long take, just the idea of how life unfolds in a setting that's just not bound by the urban rushes. It's like there's no rush. Uh, there's
Yeah.
not rush in the sense that we experience, in the city,
Right.
in larger communities. So to me, first, the idea of the long take was necessary to capture that sense, that different lifestyle, the way of understanding
Yeah.
life that shapes the understanding we just like have and the way we interact with the environment, the way we
Right.
want to construct the environment in which we live and be a part of it. So that's for the long take. Um, and then, like, the framing, I think, goes in a similar way. So there's not a because there's not a rush. It's just a different rhythm that
Right.
allows first for a sense of contemplation, of
Yeah.
observation,
Yeah.
and you know an exercise on on for the filmmaker in a way is this idea of just becoming aware of all the elements that are part of the environment,
Yeah.
because you have the opportunity
Yeah.
to
Well, you have.
experience them. um, So, and then what does each part, each shot reveals, each element within the environment can say, once you allow for it to express.
Right.
So, especially, in the first part with the flags, which to me already represented a sense of identity and a
Hmm.
sense of identity in a territory, that again was not bound by this sense of urgency that we have to run here, run there. So, and the
Yeah.
flags, were just flowing in its territory, in the territory where they're meant to flow.
Yeah.
Then, which is followed, by all these shots of animals, and which are to some, I think to some people might be like, oh yeah, just animals, pets, but they're very much part of the life, that's happening there. There,
Yeah.
it's all like an introduction of characters because as we watch the film, they keep coming back and coming back, and they're
Right.
always in the frame, and they're
Right.
always part of the action in some way. So it's deconstructing the larger environment, into the pieces that make it, which
Yeah.
are human and non-human. Just
Yeah.
again, for just because of the way that environment and land are understood in that territory.
Yeah. No, that's great. That, that really makes sense to me, and I can really see the sort of the way that that you talk about even the sort of the pace of like this place. Like you seem it's I get the sense that there's a kind of a level of sort of like um, there's a kind of a real compulsion to really sort of articulate and express this idea of the differences between what you might expect in a more kind of accelerated place in the city, and what this sort of space kind of provides for not only your uncle and aunt, but also for you as sort of somebody who's spending some time with your family in this way. So
Mhm.
it's a really lovely kind of poetic way of kind of thinking about this. And I just really like the way the camera. You sort of resolve to like there's a certain kind of fidelity to like the aesthetics of a shot, and then the figures may sometimes like be perfectly framed within it,
Mhm.
and it's like they become kind of part of like this very sort of aesthetically sort of pleasing kind of tableau. And then, but sometimes it's like, like I, talked about how your uncle
Mhm.
sits down and his head is like cut
Yeah,
off.
yeah.
And it's like, if you were making a commercial film, it'd be like, well, I better tilt up. But no, you decide, no, that's not going to be the way it works. Even in the scene towards the end where they're roasting the lamb, or they're,
Mhm.
they're grilling the lamb, they're kind of crowding the edges of the frame. It's like,
Uh-huh.
you do you zoom out? Do you move the camera? No, you just, it's sort of, this is where we are, and it's very fixed, and it's very resolute. And so I think that that's kind of a refreshing kind of approach. And I think
um,
that, yeah,
yeah, and to me, I've found, through just practice and making films with friends, family, the idea that, by allowing the shot to run, and not trying to reframe or
yeah,
restage or, reshoot things.
right.
Sometimes, these little comments come up, this sense of, I don't know, like we, there's, again, in developing this intimacy, people just get used to the camera being there, and by not moving so much,
Yeah,
from a very practical sense,
yeah,
but then there's this idea that, as we deconstruct the environment into little pieces, we're not forgetting
yeah,
so of course what's in the frame is important, but then, by acknowledging what's in the edge, and then what's beyond, it's like a way of acknowledging that the environment is a whole. So, we're focusing on a little thing, but the conversations are still going and the animals are still making a sound. And, my uncle being on the edge of the frame, or like just past it, is because there's more to that, at
yeah,
least the way I see it,
yeah,
and the
yeah,
way perhaps I want to invite people to see it is
sure.
we're focusing on the pot, but, there's this conversation. So there's cooking, and there's a dialogue that reveals what the context of it all,
Yeah,
the context in the kitchen, and also the context,
yeah.
the general context.
Yeah. And I think, again, if you think about like traditional narrative cinema, there's this kind of like impatience to like, okay, well, my aunt is off screen right now, so I better cut to a shot of her on the phone, doing these things. Or like, for example, even the scene where, there's the little, towards the end where the aunt keeps picking up the sheep, the
Mhm.
baby, lamb,
Baby lamps, yeah.
and and sort of like coaxing them sort of forward, and there's a certain kind of tenderness to that, but there's also this kind of like, well, this is how long it's going to take, and the
Mhm.
shot is entirely determined by the strength or lack of strength that these little creatures have to
Mhm.
sort of move through the space. So it's like very much as if the form of the film is partly sort of determined by you know the animal, or
Mhm.
or in the case of whoever happens to be present on the screen. It's like, so it's there's, to me, that's a really sort of interesting and very democratic way to think about making a film. You're not sort of kind of like cutting to the action bits. It's all it's like, this is what the day-to-day things kind of like feel like and look like. This is the struggle, these little, that your aunt is having, like being
Uh-huh.
sort of like patiently picking the animal up and going. It sort of reminded me a little bit of like, I don't know if you've, Jacques Tati films, where it's like, long single take, and we watch all these things happen within it. And for Tati, there's a kind of a way it's meant to be kind of about humor, very gradual and slow. This one is about the sort of kindness and tenderness that sort of unfolds as the scene or as the shot progresses. So I think that's really, really fascinating. Um, I was really drawn to the sense of the ways the daily prosaic transactions take place. So, like the ones I just described, I get the sense that this is a very familiar world for you, even though we also understand that you are a visitor or you're
Mhm.
from, you've come from away. Maybe it's really familiar to you, but you've been away and now you're back. What do those everyday things mean to you as you're sort of experiencing them through the lens of your camera?
Yeah, to me, first there's the idea of connecting with family.
Hmm.
So the sense that I wanna, spend as much time as I can with them, and that means, sitting
Yeah,
as they're cooking, as they're like moving the lamps, and
yeah,
all these little details, again, that represent that particular rhythm of life. So, the idea of cooking, a dish,
yeah,
there's an acknowledgement of how long it takes, how
yeah,
much it takes, and the
yeah,
care that it takes, and the portion of a day that means to have just a nice meal,
yeah,
and or what it means, for a pair of little lamps just to go downhill,
yeah,
and the whole family dynamic that occurs around it.
yeah,
To me, it was very important,
yeah.
those as a way to be truthful to the environment,
Hmm.
to the environment not just as a landscape, but
Yeah,
as a whole
yeah,
dynamic, but also as just a way of spending time with my family.
yeah. No, that's great. As a filmmaker, really, that really resonates for me. I tend to sort of feel as though when I embark on a subject that I want to work with, it very often feels as though it's about the sort of reconnecting to something that really sort of is a part of like of your heart. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
that really comes through. Um, I think there's a very strong sense that this film speaks about belonging, okay, and
Mhm.
perhaps even about yearning. We witness two people who are so intertwined with the landscape, and there's a contentedness that really resonates. Where do you situate yourself in this space? Do you feel like you are from away, or is it a reconnection? I mean, you've kind of answered it in the previous question, but I guess I want to sort of get a sense of your sort of your own emotional sort of journey as you sort of take on a film like this.
Yeah, I know that's a big thing for me, actually,
Yeah.
because it is connecting and reconnecting with family. And there was a lot about that, just talking with my uncle, about just the past and things that I didn't know about family,
Yeah.
which was not all in the film, but, part of the experience that helped me, understand uh, the situation and the context. But then more of, yeah, and that was with family, as not uncle, aunt. But then with the territory, it's a bit different because that was actually my first time, in that
Oh.
particular territory.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so hearing stories, like about, family or events that happened there, uh, was, from before I was there, in a way pushed me to get there.
Right.
And so I see it, from a very personal position as a way of the first couple steps, to actually understand
Nice. Nice.
um, part of my roots, and just by making, by making,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and yeah, but no, it was an important kind of question, concern that I had in my head, like of what I was gonna encounter, the way in which I
Right.
was gonna understand it, if it was not to go along with the way they saw it. But yeah, I was lucky that, I mean, the connection, with my uncle was there, and there was an interest in making this,
Yeah.
and allow me to
Yeah.
be in the space. And then yeah, there was what's great, at least for me, is that then as they watch it, they can recognize themselves and recognize the territory the way they would have liked it to be made. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
That's great. No, I love this idea too that in some ways that there's this level of to by which they are nurturing you and sort of
Mhm.
drawing you in. And there's a kind of a way that becomes something that we as an audience, I think, kind of experience vicariously. I mean, um, the, there's no sense. I mean, there's no question. I mean, to me, they seem like such incredibly lovely people, and that really sort of like, it's like I really sort of like felt like, like if I were like lost and wandering, I would feel as though they could be like this beacon in the dark for me. So it's really, which is really nice. It's a really nice kind of way of kind of like thinking about how your film kind of conveys that idea.
Mhm.
Um,
No, yeah, I mean, it. No, it was a period of, I feel like, a lot of personal development.
yeah,
Just imagine being in a little farm, which
yeah,
was like, you know, like for practical purposes in the middle of nowhere.
yeah,
So it
yeah,
was, them four, so my uncles, parents, and nothing else. The animals, of course, everything we see in the film. But then it was a drive to get to the closest town, which
yeah,
is what's shown in the last
yeah,
portion.
yeah,
So yeah, no,
yeah,
the whole thing felt a bit like that, just a
yeah,
type of, yeah, just a discovery, a
yeah.
constant discovery of like the place, the people, myself.
They also seemed extremely sort of aware and really sort of like understanding of the process that you're going through as a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're going to go edit the film, and there's like this
Uh-huh.
kind of like they really seem to kind of like have really sort of internalized that in ways again that seem so generous. It's like they've taken the time to like kind of like they're not making any assumptions about what your challenges are as a human trying to navigate through these questions of identity. Like they get it, and I
Yeah.
think that's really really great.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. um, I wanted to ask you if there are any artistic or filmic traditions that you feel kind of a kinship to as you work on these. You call them autoethnographic films, and I'm wondering whether or not there's a tradition that you're sort of kind of responding to or tapping into, or how do you sort of situate yourself within these ideas of these sort of autoethnographic kind of cinema?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to me, first, it's a response, like you said, something I respond to. And like I mentioned briefly earlier, just the idea of the way identity is portrayed in mainstream media, in
Hmm.
Chile at least. Um, so there's a series of conflicts, and for the media, it's very easy to, encapsulate a whole identity based around
Right.
a certain conflict,
Yeah.
a certain event. And so there was a period in which I was getting a lot of, just narratives of violence that
Yeah.
and imagery of violence that I really wanted to respond to.
Right.
And I found, and it kind of fit just the style I had been developing,
Right.
just the idea of portraying rural life, daily life,
Yeah.
focusing on time, intimacy.
Yeah.
So yes, a response to that.
Yeah.
And then, in more conceptually, there was um, there was a documentary TV series in Chile called Al Sur del Mundo, like at the south of the world, which
Okay.
was not, autoethnographic, but it was so careful in the way it portrayed people, and you could see that there was care and there was a sense of collaboration. People were very into it,
Yeah.
so they were very much aware that there was a performance for the camera,
Gotcha.
which is something that I really love about that
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it gave a very poetic result, and again this sense of intimacy that I feel like wouldn't be achieved, if I just got there with a camera and
Yeah.
recorded by.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was very impactful for me.
Yeah.
But and then stylistically, I think there's the whole narrative. I mean, the whole tradition of cinema of time.
Right.
Filmmakers like Sokurov or Apichatpong with Asefaku,
Yeah.
um, like James
Great.
Benning. I don't know, people who are aware, of the way the world unfolds, in particular context, that you can't just adapt what's the commercial style to every single uh, context.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah.
No, that's great. That really sort of puts it into broad relief for me for sure. Um, sort of my kind of, I guess, probably my last kind of sort of big lingering question. The audience may not know about the particular circumstances of land ownership and the conflicts that are part
Mhm,
of the Mapuche experience. And yet, the small bits of dialogue reveal a sense of fear, anxiety, and opposition. I was really
mhm,
struck by the seeming violence of the transition to the scene on the road
mhm,
towards the end of the film, and I had this combination of I felt angry and sad and melancholy all at
mhm.
the same time. The
Yeah.
image of your aunt looking out the window, it looks like at one point she's moved by something.
Mhm,
And I just, whether or not it's about saying goodbye or, but there's, obviously the reference to these men with guns, which was in such stark contrast
mhm,
to everything that we've seen, which is so peaceable and so, kind of like removed from that stuff. And so
mhm.
I guess I'm wondering, how all that sort of resonates for you, and what whether or not that's something that you were sort of intending as a reaction.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's that's what I intended, and that's how it felt when I was there. Because, like I said, I wanted to make, and everything is constructed that way. Um, a portrait of peace, an imagery of daily life, a peaceful daily life. Um, and of course, throughout that process, there were all these hints, all these hints, like, there's an acknowledgement, and it's always there, it's always in the back,
Yeah,
this idea of the conflict.
yeah,
So it's all peace until the idea of violence, the idea of the imagery of guns is brought, but it's brought from outside,
yeah,
like, so the way I understood it, as I was shooting them and then as I was editing, is that, like, I could go and make a portrait of, how peaceful their lives is, but there will always be this connection, whether we want it or not, to violence that's not necessarily from the territory, that doesn't come from the territory, but is brought to it and
yeah,
ends up generating this circle.
yeah.
Because then this violence that's brought to the territory is portrayed within it and becomes the identity of the territory.
Right.
And that's how it felt to me, as I was shooting. It was, of course, like a very happy, melancholic moment of saying goodbye, and driving around.
Yeah,
And it's all broken in a way, like brought back to this by external agents, which are, the
yeah.
militarized police.
Yes.
It was a shock. And within the context of that shot itself, to me, so everything was just so much about, how long it took to cook, how long it took to bring lamps downhill, just the timing that it took to fix the water tank. So, as a life that functions in its particular rhythm, like how long it takes, and it doesn't matter, there's no rush.
Yeah.
And then this realization of, there's 10 minutes from here to there, and there's also a very marked period of time, like a 5 minutes drive between this reality and a military checkpoint.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So, the way it all functioned within one
Yeah.
take,
Yeah.
it's like, I
Yeah.
don't know, to me, it was,
That no, that really resonated for me. I mean, as somebody who lives on a border, even though it's just the Canada-U.S. border, this idea of this sort of that kind of that sort of barrier that's psychologically there,
mhm,
and the sort of reminder of the sort of the kind of the state sort of presence
mhm,
is really sort of in broad, really prominent. But I totally think that you structured it in such a eloquent way, to kind of go from that sort of pastoral space to this thing that's much more suggestive of a kind of a situation that's kind of fraught with power dynamics and fear. It was really well done, and so it's a really remarkable film. And I'm so thankful that you took the contemplative sort of steps to make it what it is. So thank you very
No,
much.
thank you. And I mean, I'm really glad to have the opportunity, to share it with you and people at Ann
Yeah,
Arbor. And yeah, thank you for this interview too.
yeah. Well, thank you, Fernando,
So very
I hope,
nice.
and I look forward to seeing your next films, and I hope we get to meet at a festival one day.